Welcome to the official podcast of FOR ETERNIA.com. We have the power. I'm your host, AJ, aka Voodoo Magic, aka Zor. And today's episode is titled Worlds Perfectly Meshing. Words not only spoken in the comic we are discussing today, but a line that perfectly encapsulates what this new exciting comic is trying to accomplish. Yes, today is the day, Wednesday, September 25th, when fans can finally check out the fantastic first issue of the Masters of the Universe Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles crossover comic series, Turtles of Grayskull, from Dark Horse Comics, which hits comic book shelves and digital platforms everywhere. And today we are going to discuss the genesis of this new comic series and perhaps some vague discussions of issue 1. And don't worry, we're avoiding spoilers today. But who better to discuss this exciting new series with the creatives themselves, the masterminds, the king of crossovers, writer Tim Seeley and artist Freddie Williams. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having us on. What a great introduction.
Talk to Freddie when he's shorn. Looking good, Freddie.
Thanks. Thanks.
Slick.
I asked Kiki, my wife, to take a little off the top, but she just got really carried away. And no, I'm joking. No, I was like, "What have you done?" No, I'm joking. Yeah, it's only been about 2 months, so yeah, this is our first podcast post shave. That's funny. That's great that's our opening salvo of conversation about me going to. I just on a side note, I just saw a coworker, an old coworker from Hallmark Cards. I used to work at Hallmark, and I had really long hair when I worked there. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, I almost didn't recognize you without your long hair." And I was like, "Yeah, I now have the opposite of that. Like, it's the total opposite. It's zero hair." Yeah. Anyway.
Well, you wear it well.
Thanks. Thank you.
Actually, speaking of something that maybe suits you, Freddie, should I have referred to you as Freddie Williams II? Is that the proper way?
I mean, like, if we were in a court of law, yeah, but it's not that high up of a priority. So part of the reason I'm the second, I mean, I am actually the second because my father was the first, but it's also to help disambiguate me on the covers for, like, if versus Scott Williams or J.H. Williams III. So I'm the second, but it's still it gets a little confusing with the Roman numerals. But no, it's fine. I'm Freddie Williams. Everyone calls me that. I only am really credited like that on paperwork and stuff. So.
Okay. And geez, I also Tim, you, I think there's some congratulations in order, because since the last time Tim Seeley was on, he was nominated for an Eisner Award for his work in comics. You were nominated for Best New Series, right? And lost.
Yeah, we lost. But it made my daughter cry, but still, it was cool. I got to go to the Eisners for Local Man, so that was cool.
Well, what is it they say? It's an honor to be nominated, right?
Sure.
Is that true?
Sure, I don't. I got to go to a kind of dinner thing with my family. It was fine. I was sitting next to Dave Johnson and other comic creators, and the moment we got lost, Dave leaned over and said, "If it makes you feel better, I was up against the guy who did Fables covers every year for 7." So I was like, "Oh, okay, well, there we go."
Well, I hope Freddie keeps his Eisner hidden then.
Dude, I have like 1/32 of an Eisner, because the first series I ever did for DC Comics was Seven Soldiers, Mr. Miracle, and Seven Soldiers was like an overarching. They had multiple series, and Grant Morrison was like the spearhead for that. He was the writer for it. It was his idea. So through him, he's the one. Grant Morrison has the Eisner, but his series all got an Eisner, if that makes sense. And so everybody technically within it, because it was for the series, technically owns some part of that Eisner, or can say that. So the way it's technically credited is I drew an Eisner winning series, or one of the Eisner winning series. So it's very non-specific to me, and I don't usually bring it up because it's so difficult, so complicated to explain.
Do you still get a statue, or no? That's not how it works. No. Okay.
No.
All right. So real quick, before we get into Turtles of Grayskull, working together, right? I mean, you both must feel that you complement each other really well, because Turtles of Grayskull isn't your first rodeo together, your first comic together. So why do you think that is? What is the secret of your guys' success?
So Tim is proof of cosmic beings or cosmic string theory connecting two people through space and time, because we did not grow up together, but if we did, we would have been best friends. Everything that when he describes like his experience in high school sounds like I would have been right there with him. Playing D&D, I was right there with him. The types of comics and cartoons and the figure collection and stuff, we were basically like almost the same proto matter put on the earth. He was in Chicago and I was in Kansas or whatever. But yeah, we've worked together on the first thing we worked on was Injustice versus Masters of the Universe. That was the first crossover for DC Comics. And in that, just reading some of the scripts, so like Tim is writing what I need to draw, but he's putting like reference in there of very obscure characters that I thought I knew all the characters in Masters of the Universe. And there's characters that I hadn't, he's reaching deep into the reference vault and pulling out all these cool characters. And it was impressive to me. And when we did like the press junket at San Diego Con that year, he just had, it was really fun to be around Tim, and very witty guy with lots of great ideas that he would just pull out. And it was a great experience. So then after that, we were supposed to be doing, I'm sure we'll cover this a little bit more later, but the original idea for this crossover, or type of crossover like this, was going to happen in late 2019 or 2020. And that was when it was going to be at DC Comics, and I was pushing really hard for Tim and I to work on it together. And most likely that would have happened if it hadn't been canceled. And it was with Tim that we talked about, he and I were bouncing ideas and stuff. So
I definitely want to get into that, but do you guys stay in your own lanes? Meaning like the art and the writing, or do you guys kind of, I know because Tim's also an artist as well. And I think Freddie, you've dabbled in writing, right?
Oh yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tim's very like open with, we have a great collaboration from my perspective, that Tim is very open to like listen. If I have ideas, he is very open to hear them. And if it works, then he works it in. And if not, then there's no like ego involved with either of us pushing against it or whatever. So I guess our lanes are very fuzzy, so we don't. There's a lot of room in our lanes that overlap, so we stay in our lanes overall, because I would never like suggest a specific line of dialogue or take control in that way, or try to.
Gotcha.
And he's not sending me layouts, but he did help me do some layout assists. I don't know if you remember, Tim, but you helped me lay out the cover of issue 6 or something, or maybe 5 of Injustice versus Masters of the Universe. Yeah. So yeah, there's some crossover there for sure.
That's great.
We also did Bequest together. That was a creator-owned book that was during the pandemic, and now we're on. I always say He-Man Ninja Turtles, but Turtles of Grayskull. So love working with Tim. He's awesome.
That's great. I mean, they say never work with your spouses and stuff like that, or never work with your friends, right? Because it could just break that bond so easily.
Yeah. So I mean, luckily, Tim and I aren't married yet, so we don't have to break that part.
Well, I appreciate that we are not married to each other. The comic is such a collaborative medium, so you have to, if you come into it all ego, or sort of like that you control something, you will have a very bad time. But I think you'll also, if you work with someone and you notice any kind of sort of similar shared viewpoint or any kind of chemistry, like that's why you'll see people work together once and then never again, and you have to assume like but if people keep working together, you're like, oh, okay, it's because these people sort of understood each other, because it really is like, it's a medium wherein I write a script just to Freddie. I mean, that's who the script is for, and then the comic that comes out of it is his interpretation of that. So it can be pretty harrowing to write something and not feel like what you intended, is getting onto the page. So, I think for this stuff specifically, the crossovers and I think this one and Injustice, Master Universe, like, you have to be protective of all the stuff, but you can't be too protective. So it has to be kind of like, you have to know these things and you have to be affectionate towards them, but you also have to be willing to kind of do things that are unexpected. You have to sometimes kind of break a little bit of the plastic action figures. And I can do that with Freddie, which I think is what makes them, good fusions of these two vastly different seeming properties.
To touch upon what you're saying, Tim Sheridan was on the last podcast, writer Tim Sheridan, and he said, I think he heard it from someone else, so he might not be able to take credit for it, that the writer tells the story to the artist and the artist tells the story to the world.
There you go. Yeah. That's why Tim Sheridan gets the big bucks.
Does he? That's awesome.
He's on the TV show. I just assume those guys are just rolling it.
Oh, yeah, the TV show. Yeah, he's done a few.
Yeah, all right. He's one of the main writers. So, yeah, I think that's a really good way to think of it. And there's a lot of the big stuff most artists can do, but the little stuff is where a lot of artists have trouble on it. I think that's something that Freddie and I worked on this long enough, where it's like these little moments may not seem important, but they're the heart often of these kind of things, right? The character stuff and the moments between them, and the big fights and all that, and the getting chased around by Monstroid or whatever, all hinges on you caring about who these people are and why they're together.
Right. All right. So, gentlemen, this is so strange, right? Meaning, this never seems to happen. And when does this happen? Roughly 4 to 5 years ago, you both, Tim Seeley, Freddie Williams II, was planning on doing this very project, not titled Turtles of Grayskull per se, but a Masters of the Universe Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic crossover event for DC and IDW. But then it gets canceled, and we see that happen from time to time, unfortunately. But now here you are again, same creators with a different publisher doing it. And it almost feels like the world doesn't normally work that way with comics, with television, or even movies. A project gets canned and then revived at another company, and it almost never is revived with the same previous creators. They move on, give someone else a turn. So do you guys just marvel that you got a chance at this project again? I mean, do you pinch yourselves? Is it fate?
I'm not sure about. I don't know if it's fate or not. That would be awesome.
Yeah, it's not fate. It's people. I mean, in this case, the reasons that it didn't go the first time was just simple timing and then politics, and then a worldwide pandemic. But the license changing from DC and all that sort of stuff. But the reason that we got to do it again is not a coincidence. It's that Rob David at Mattel told Dark Horse to put us on it. So. We're just lucky to have Rob on our side for this. And I think the reason this stuff is rare is that people at sort of entertainment company corporate levels are rarely loyal, or they just aren't. And we have this sort of amazing thing with Rob, is that he stood up for us. And they were working on this internally at Mattel while Freddie and I didn't know it. We didn't know that they were working on an actual toy line version of it. But then, when that was far enough along that they felt like it was ready to be comics, it was Rob that said, "Okay, here's the toy line, and call Freddie and Tim." So it's not luck; it's Rob.
Rob is something else, isn't he? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I was just going to reinforce that that we're very lucky. I feel very lucky, because it would have been easy for Rob or anybody else to still make a wise choice, but go with a different creative team, because of and also that I wasn't already committed to something else, that it worked out the way that it did. So the way that it worked for me was that I had gotten an email from Mattel, and it was like, would like to or we hope that you're available to do some mini comics, but it didn't say of sort of the crossover or anything. And I was like, yeah, that sounds interesting. I always loved those mini comics when I was a kid. So yeah, that sounds cool. And so I had to sign all this paperwork and like an NDA and stuff. And then whenever I got the more information, it was the Turtles of Grayskull line, but like I had to draw the turtles more like in the Playmates style. So they weren't like the sort of modern looking ones. And like Shredder looks more like the animated version or the Playmates version. And, you know, like maybe halfway through that or something is when the plans for when I started working on the first couple mini comics is when the plans for the Dark Horse book. Cause I thought, well, hey, even if it's just a mini comic, it's cool to cross these over. And, you know, I have no control over the storyline or the designs or anything, but it's something. And then whenever they were like, yeah, now we're talking about doing something with Dark Horse. And we heard that you really, you know, that last time you were going to work with Tim Seeley and we loved him. That's what Rob was telling me. And I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. So I think one of the quotes, I could be misquoting Rob, but I think he told the mini comics guys at Mattel, if you don't ask Freddie and Tim first, they're going to kill me. I think actually he said something like that. It was like, he's in fear, not genuinely in fear of his life, for his life, but he was like, you have to ask them first at least. And if they're busy, so be it. But, you know, if you don't, they're going to kill me. So,
you know, I wonder what turned Rob onto this project. Was it your art book or Tim? Did you talk to him about it before? Like just in conversation, you know, over a drink? Well, like, yeah. Oh, we were working on this. It was canceled. And go ahead.
Well, the toy line part of this is kind of fascinating because the brand team and the toy team and Mattel are different, generally speaking. Like the people who run the toy side and kind of what comes out of that, and then brand team is sort of the story and all that. They're sort of a different level, and Rob is more brand team. But the cool thing about Ninja Turtles, and I'm not exactly sure why this is, but the license for the toys of this is a little bit more open than most figures. So like, and you'll see this if you go to Target, and there's Playmates Ninja Turtles, but there's NECA Ninja Turtles, and there's and multiple companies do this, and you know, they've done crossover figures with Stranger Things, and they've done crossover figures with Street Fighter and Transformers and all these sort of stuff. So I think the flexibility of whatever is allowed in there, which is amazing, means that at some point Mattel was just like, well, let's just license Turtles. and that's kind of what made this toy line. But it comes from the toy team side. When you look at when the toys come in, you know, they are sort of based on the Playmates designs more than anything. And they're, you know, I think they're toys. They're like action figure. They are cool and they're fun to play with. And so on the brand side of it, you know, when this is a license that goes over to Dark Horse, you know, IDW's got to have their say and all this sort of stuff. But it allowed us to have something like a product that they had we're pushing out, and this makes this like a marketing tie-in to some degree. But they were also like super cool about it and said, well, it doesn't have to be the same story as the mini comic. It can be, you know, sort of its own thing, and the parameters were pretty loose. But just out of affection for all this stuff, Freddie and I were like, well, we can make it all work. Like it all ties together, and none of it is not, you know, canon. Like it can all be canon, sort of the way we approach it.
So, you know what? Let me get there in a second. Let me go back to the figures. You were talking the figures. I'm hearing through the grapevine that they are selling well. I mean, really well.
Real well.
Like maybe initially even better than the first wave of the MOTU Origins, you know, Masters of the Universe figures. And I guess that's turtle power for you, you know? It makes you wonder, like, which is the stronger franchise, right? I mean, it probably has to be TMNT over MOTU, right? Considering the amount of movies and shows and comics that the Turtles had. I'm not talking dedicated fan base or passionate.
Yeah, I mean, if you're calculating it that way, sure. But I mean, also He-Man can lift a planet, so I think he's stronger. He's a stronger brand in that way. But yeah, I think
I'm just talking sheer revenue generator. That's all I'm talking about.
Yeah, I don't know specifically. I've never seen the numbers, but I would assume so overall their whole life.
I mean, it's really crazy. Yeah. I don't think anything touches Turtles, to be honest.
Transformers, Tim.
As far as like just sort of overall, maybe like the most popular, if we're going like, you know, sort of the comic book brand action figures movies thing, like it's Turtles and Batman and Transformers are sort of all those things are sort of on a tier above everything else. Like it's sort of crazy to realize how successful Ninja Turtles is. Like just the fact that it started out as this weird indie black and white comic and that sustained toy lines for at least 30 years. It has sustained animated features or animated series on and off since for 30 years. I mean, almost 40 probably at this point.
Yeah.
So like it is a juggernaut, and part of it I think is just how flexible it is, and the ability for it to be both a kid's thing and for the nostalgia thing. But I mean, I took my daughter to see Mutant Mayhem, and it was just all kids screaming and having a good time, and then all their dads going like, "This is awesome," So it's just one of those few things. Like that
the Ninja Turtles. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, well,
the Ninja Turtles have an almost unreplicatable flexibility with what type of genres they work in. They work in a very grounded street level where nothing seems supernatural or nothing seems over the, like the fact that they're mutant turtles, of course, but I'm saying past that, swords do the same amount of damage they would to like a real life samurai warrior or something, all the way to, astral plane projecting through different realms or, super sci-fi alien teleportation stuff. All that stuff just works, or super cartoony or super serious, or, making them where they're 8 feet tall. Even that, like the Michael Bay produced films. I'm not saying that I love the films, but I was actually, other than the noses, I was pretty good with all their designs, all that weird. They, had all these tchotchkes all over their bodies and stuff. I still thought that looked cool. So they're so malleable. Yeah. And I don't know how or why, because I've even been on panels with Kevin Eastman where people have asked him, how come, why do you think they work with so many different types of stories and different genres and art styles? And he was like, if I knew, I would do it again. Like if it was as easy as me just knowing why, I would just replicate it and do another thing, but it's, and I love He-Man. I mean, I'm in love with He-Man and have loved it for a long time. I mean,
me too. Obviously.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, so the fact that Ninja Turtles might be like more versatile in that type of way, it's like almost impossible to explain why or how, and it's no like negativity to any other brand.
No. Like I said, I wasn't talking about passion, and MOTU is an incredibly passionate fan base, and it's my favorite fan base, obviously. But I was just talking sheer, revenue. I mean, you have to be honest with these things. MOTU is above Thundercats, right? But you realize probably Turtles is above, in regards to, and it's probably due to that versatility that you're describing, and it is, and maybe it has something to do with that Mirage Comics in the beginning that was more serious, and then the kids cartoon that was so jokey and fun. Maybe it's something.
Like Turtles might be above some small country. I mean, some medium-sized countries.
Countries, yeah.
I wouldn't call them out if I were you, Tim. This is worldwide here.
And even that's like, Tim's not throwing shade. It's just the revenue, the numbers that they generate and have over their lifetime is enormous.
What's funny is this podcast streams like Spotify and so forth, and Apple, and I get a breakout of listeners per country, and it's amazing that there's Masters of the Universe fans all over the world in the smallest countries and so forth, and and they're listening to a podcast in English. So it's really fascinating that it's worldwide, and I'm sure the Turtles are the same way. Even more to that degree.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, they're doing a Turtles Naruto crossover. Like that is that is how big Turtles is.
Yeah, I'm doing some covers for that. So been juggling that.
So that actually kind of leads to a great question, because personally, I have been a fan of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but I've never been a huge fan. I liked them as a kid. I know the history. I know the Mirage Comics that we were just talking about, the beginnings. And I remember like going with my mom to see the 1990 live action movie, which I really remember enjoying. I really loved it. And I'd watch the cartoons here and there, but I guess I never fell in love with the Turtles. I never became passionate about them like I have Masters of the Universe. So my question is, to the king of crossovers. Is ultimately the goal of a crossover, the goal of a book like this, to bring people in, to bring new fans to a property they might not fully love at this point and make them fall in love? Or is it just to do something cool for fans who love, both franchises?
Tim, what do you think?
I mean, I think we went out of our way here to make it accessible, but and I think exactly what you're saying. We wanted to bring Turtles fans to He-Man for sure. We wanted to sell a comic at the level of a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic. But I mean, I think we approached it with the way Freddie and I have approached everything we've done together is find the thing that makes these related. Like find the thing that makes them, mesh well. And for Turtles, I think it's that, one, it's really flexible. Both of them, they both have like this crazy ninja sci-fi space, magic. They have everything.
Yeah.
But I think the main thing that we thought that meshed them was that they're teenagers, and it's about having a lot of responsibility on your shoulders, even though you're not yet a man, and just sort of that idea that they as heroes they've given up that sort of childhood to be good guys.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. More specific, like for me, because Tim had, all right. So one of the obstacles that we had when coming in to, all right. So like the 2019-20 idea for the series was never fully written, but we had chunks in place, and really we couldn't use much of any of that really in this because the designs are different, and we would have started the story at a different spot really than where we needed to start it here. So in other words,
but you could have, meaning it didn't belong to DC, or meaning?
Oh yeah, we could have, because DC never paid us for that stuff. We were just pitching stuff. So we had story elements in place, and even my designs, technically nobody owns them. I mean,
I thought that was all work for hire. That's awesome.
It would be work for hire if I ever got actual money and for it, but it was like us coming up with ideas. Then with DC, they were like, okay, we'll get back to you, and then actually we'll just stall for 6 months because of a bunch of factors that are outside of our control and above my pay grade. I don't even know all the factors or the specifics, but the point is that we needed to come up, Tim and I, whenever the Turtles of Grayskull crossover happened, we didn't have like a default story that we could just pull from. We could not have used any of the elements from the previous one. And Tim came up with, and there was also the story of the mini comic already that existed. So,
right.
We've gotten quite a few questions like, is this just a big comic book version of the mini comic? And Tim had a great way to incorporate some of those elements so it didn't disregard those, but didn't tread the same ground. It actually gets to play with it sort of back and forth. And that was his first idea. And to me, that was brilliant. That was the perfect way. And honestly, I can't think of a better way than what he came up with. And I think personally for a crossover, once the baseline makes sense as to why they're on screen or in the panels together, my goal is for it to feel like the authentic version of those characters and have fun with it. But I would never want, Raphael to be suddenly like, completely out of character and acting more like a Michelangelo because the writer didn't, mysterious writer didn't know what Raphael acted like. And then when the readers get it, I don't want them to go, well, this doesn't even sound like his voice, so to speak. It, doesn't sound like that's how Splinter would talk, or, Casey Jones or whatever. And so the writer being able, so Tim, in this case, getting deep into the characters first and kind of front loading his brain with their personalities and playing off of those dynamics, is really fun to see. Like there, later on, there's like some interactions between Casey Jones and He-Man, which to me, it's like, it's fun to draw, but it's like Casey has no idea the power level difference between the two of them. And he's just like in this protection / because Casey Jones is kind of he's an off kilter kind of guy.
Yeah.
and and He-Man's not the kind of person to boast about his power. So Casey is kind of like trying to control him and is looking at him like he's just a costume weirdo, or you know what I'm saying? It's like that to me is great because that's how it would play off. Casey Jones wouldn't enter into it going, this guy can destroy a mountain. He would have no idea, and He-Man would never boast that either. So.
Right. So you mentioned the mini comics. Let's talk to mini comics real quick. Freddie, you were originally hired to draw those mini comics for that Turtles of Grayskull action figure line. Who's writing those? I'm actually not sure who's writing those. Do you know?
I think it's, I know I get the scripts from Steve, but I can't remember off the top of my head. The two contacts I have there are Steve and Damon, but I don't actually remember Steve's last name. It's something that starts with an R. I'm sorry, but I believe he's either writing them or he's helping to write it. Maybe he's like doing a co-writing or something.
I wish you guys had credits in those mini comics.
Yeah. And I don't even know who lettered or colored them either, to be honest. So I got to give a little bit of feedback on notes and stuff, but I'm not sure.
Maybe Tim.
Josh Guy, I think, writes those. Yeah.
Who is it?
Josh Guy.
I'm not sure.
I sometimes look at his social media account, and I don't think I saw anything Turtles related posted. Josh would post covers of like different Origins comics, but has he ever posted the Turtles? Maybe he has, and I'm completely wrong. Yeah, I'm going through his covers now.
Oh, this one says Robert Redman.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, Robert is the one of the brand managers. One of the.
Okay, so each of these say that. I'm sorry. I guess because my point of contact was Steve, I just always somehow mistakenly thought he had written them.
Yeah, Robert maybe all the bios on the figures and stuff too. He's like the in-house script guy.
Gotcha.
So you should edit that so I sounded like I knew exactly who wrote it. Just like immediately, I just pulled the name right off the top of my head.
Just dub it in, Robert.
Yeah.
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, like I said, there's no credits anywhere, and it's not something they make public. You often, even Joshua, if he didn't make himself public, I think on Instagram, it'd be hard to know. Yeah.
Yeah, and don't actually feel like you have to edit it. I'm just being goofy. It's funny if it's clumsy. I'm a clumsy guy. I don't know what I'm doing. So,
for the longest time, I was begging Mattel, one way and another, to actually put credits of their artists. They have such beautiful artwork on their packaging, and be nice. I think NECA does that. On the bottom of the box, they say, artwork by so and so, and so I was even telling people inside of Mattel, but other than some like San Diego Comic-Con exclusives, they don't put it on the packaging. And I know they don't have to, but it doesn't hurt, right? It doesn't hurt anyone.
There's some great art on those Turtle of Grayskull action figure, the packaging and stuff. It looks really great.
Yeah. So, Freddie, while you were illustrating these Turtles of Grayskull mini comics, did you know at the time that you'd be doing this 4-issue comic series?
Not for, I don't know. I think I knew by the time I was working on the second mini comic.
The second one.
But so not at the very, very beginning, I didn't know. And even then, when it was mentioned to me, it was not like a done deal for sure type of thing. It was more like a, I don't know, we're kind of talking about it and depending on to see how things go. And just like on a side note, it's a miracle that any crossover ever gets made because there are so many moving parts, so many, I've never seen the contracts between the two companies, but I'm assuming that they have to be like, telephone books, if you remember those, because they're such powerful, large brands. And for them to come, that's the crossover that we all should be celebrating. The two executives getting into the same room, that's the crossover that we're like, wow, that should be blowing our minds that they're actually like, coming to an agreement and it didn't fall apart. So it's a miracle that any of them get made. So anyway, whenever they were bringing up that, maybe it might come out with Dark Horse, would you be interested? And I was like, oh my gosh, yes. It just feels like it would be a dream come true. So earlier you had mentioned this book, and this is, so this has all of my original designs. It doesn't really talk much about the story stuff that Tim and I first had together, but you can just with some of the imagery in here, which probably won't show up very well, but there's some indication of what some of the story stuff might have been. But
Weren't you selling that through your website? I think is that FreddieWilliams.com. I reported it on FOR ETERNIA.com.
FreddieArt.com. And I think when you put it on there, I got this big mass rush of orders right away. So thank you for that. Yeah. But
happy to help.
I had put out this book. Basically, this was well before the mini comic, well before Turtles of Grayskull and all that stuff. So it was like 2020. There was this pandemic you may have heard of. And then after that, about a year later, I thought, well, I've got all these designs, and He-Man's not even at DC anymore. So it probably just never happened. I might as well share these because I didn't have like an NDA that stopped me from sharing them or whatever. So I started tweeting out all of the pencil studies of the designs that I had done. And that seemed to interest a lot of people. And then I had gotten some private messages from people at both Nickelodeon, Paramount, and some Mattel people that shall all remain nameless that were all saying, we're really sorry that fell apart. We were really pulling for it. And, who knows? It's awesome to see that so many people are into it. Maybe one day we can do something. So don't lose hope.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That should encourage more people to do books like that if they can, for failed projects,
Yeah. I mean, and I don't even know if they saw the books, but they just saw what I was putting on Twitter and the fan response to it. So I think that's what was probably making some of these execs going, well, it's clear that Freddie and Tim would be excited if it ever came back around, the opportunity. And look at this fan reaction. There's so many people who are asking for this. It's just money on the table waiting to be grabbed. So
I think that book could have been part of the catalyst there. I mean, it's like a pebble dropping in the pond and creating those ripples, It kind of reminds me, I don't know if you guys are movie buffs. For the longest time, Ryan Reynolds couldn't make the Deadpool movie made.
Right.
And then someone leaked this, I don't know, what do you call it, test? Yeah. And then people went crazy for it. And then that finally kicked the movie out of development hell into gear. And
if something like that comes out and there's a big fan response, on the other end, if there's no fan response, or if it's like negative where they're like, this looks terrible, who would think of doing it like this? That will, like, if it was already on the fence, it like knocks it on the side of this will never ever happen. Just put it right in its coffin and into the ground.
Yes.
So when I started reading issue 1, Turtles of Grayskull, which is out today, everyone, run to your comic book store or digital retailer. I had no idea it was tied into the mini comics, that this 4-issue comic series from Dark Horse taps into that storyline. There was no press about it, but it's interwoven. Now I have to imagine that something like that, Tim, is difficult to accomplish, to create one large, cohesive tapestry of a story, mini comics and regular comics, after the fact, versus being written all at once. So was it a challenge to do it after the fact, to write something like this?
No. I mean, my whole job is making shit work after the fact, right? Like,
right.
I mean, like, every time you do a superhero book, it's like, here, tell the story of, when Rogue was in the Savage Land, and you're like, okay, and then you read the old stuff, and you're like, okay, then you got to figure it out, and it's the same thing. So I mean, it's just, part of the job of comic book writers, like weaving these seemingly separate threads together, but all the other creators who've worked before you had great ideas, and they left some nuggets, and the job partially, I think, for me, is recognizing good nuggets and then pulling those forward. So the way we approached Turtles of Grayskull was like, so the mini comics are sort of this existing, you open the Turtles of Grayskull and it starts right out, hey, this is what happened. The Turtles, and they've all been together. And then, I don't want to ruin anything, but partly it's that this is the story of how we don't get to that, right? Because it sort of leads to catastrophe. So I think what Freddie and I, one of the things we kept talking about is that the toys and the previous existing stuff told a fairly complete story.
Yeah.
And but there was a lot of elements that they didn't use, obviously, and Master Universe and Turtles is this huge world of stories. So we wanted to figure out how we could both use the cool toys. Like, they're too cool not to use. Like, purple mutant He-Man is too cool not to use, and Samurai Beastman is too cool not to use. Oni Samurai Beastman is too cool not to use. But it's a closed circle. So we're like, well, what if we open up the circle? And then by opening up the circle, you get sort of this story, and then we can just go anywhere from there. Right. And now we get to see how they end up, together, and that allows us. If you read issue 1, spoilers, we get to have them go to the Triceraton Empire, and we get to have them go to, all this sort of stuff that.
I said it was a no spoiler podcast.
he was speaking theoretically. Not to cut you off, but whatever. But I just want to say, like, Tim made it look easy. It sounds like it was in fact easy. I felt intimidated when we first started because I was afraid that mentally not that it was up to me to make a story, but as far as what I might bring to the table as suggestions, I was basically stuck because I was stuck in mini comic brain because I'd already drawn a couple by the time we had started. And also the auxiliary part of my brain was stuck in the first crossover as far as storyline wise. So it's like I couldn't really think of anything new. And Tim he made it look very easy. So I think that just speaks to how talented, how skilled that he is, that you would assume it was hard. I also thought it was hard, but he was like, that's no big deal. He said, butt out, kid. I got this. And then he pushed me to the side.
Well, part of the thing that there was a nugget left in my head from when I was a kid reading Ninja Turtles comics, which was that there was this issue with the character Rennet Tilly, who I loved as a kid because she was like sort of Valley Girl, time traveling, and she had bare legs and cleavage, and of course that was enough for me when I was a kid, 15 years old or whatever. But the idea of Rennet was so great, and there was a story, and I had this sort of nugget of it when Freddie and I were talking. It was like there was one time where Rennet goes back, and it was a story that involved the character Cerebus, but essentially involved like this sort of barbarian character and this sort of fantasy, almost He-Man-esque world. And I was like, that's our nugget right there. Like, she's done this before, right? And the cool thing about Rennet is that she is the same Rennet in all versions of Ninja Turtles. So, like, even when she shows up in the animated shows, she references other stuff because it's always the same Rennet. And I think that's so great. That's the coolest thing. So
it's kind of like Q from Star Trek in a way. I don't know if you guys ever watched.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So we decided that would be a sort of great way to do a variation on the story was by bringing in Rennet and having her get to sort of play. She's the one who knows both these worlds to some degree, and clearly from if you read the procedures, like, oh, Rennet has been to Eternia before. Rennet has seen versions of this before. Of course she has. Like, she looks like a He-Man guy, right? She
looks perfect. She fits right into the line.
Yeah.
She would look perfect out of the He-Man line. I just want to add something to the side just about drawing her is that because you said, she's got bare legs and cleavage and stuff. Well, she also, she looks like a really cool character, but once you draw her one time, you go, I don't want to draw those clocks ever again. It's like she's got because it's hard to draw them in perspective, all the geometry of the different clocks and stuff. And then it doesn't have to be completely consistent, luckily, but there's just a lot of weird, she looks like a Kirby character, but she's got like, the big, I don't know, just all these shapes that are difficult to draw in perspective. So drawing her a couple times, it's like, okay, we need to put her off panel now so I don't have to draw these clocks.
Like every animated version of her gets rid of that outfit. Like the original outfit that Kevin drew, with all those little clocks hanging off and everything, like everyone else went, oh God, no,
Yeah, that was wise. I'm glad once it's done, but in the process, I'm like, what am I getting myself into?
Her too, it's like you said she's a Kirby character, which is exactly right. But she's also like, you take all the sort of 80s, comic book stuff that we all know so well. And it's so clear, like all the guys writing this stuff were huge fans of Jack Kirby, Doctor Who, right? Like they're all all like
Yeah.
sitting around reading the same things, and it's influencing them. So also Rennet is sort of a time lord. I mean, she's got a time scepter, and she calls her boss like a time lord and stuff. So it totally made sense since they were already doing it, kind of combining all these things that sort of approach it the same way.
I'm glad you talked about her, because I thought, you know, I'm not as well versed on her, but I got an impression of what she was. And I'm glad, you know, especially if people are coming from the Masters of the Universe side and listen to this podcast, you know, they'll know. So, you know, the one thing I wanted to ask you guys is if either of you were concerned about the timing of these comics with the mini comics, meaning, again, this is just from my perspective, and I won't mention spoilers. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say that issue 1 of Turtles of Grayskull, out now, begins with Splinter and April. And at first, based on the situation April and Splinter were in that first issue, I said to myself, oh, Tim and Freddie's, you know, comic is not connected to the mini comics, because I just read the 3rd Turtles of Grayskull mini comic, and Splinter and April are in a much, much different situation, right? But then I read further on. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, because the toy designs, obviously, they combined, you know, Splinter Skull and Sorceress April, which those are out on shelves at Target, so I think we can tell people.
Okay. Yeah. So at first, but I thought it wasn't connected based on that. You know, based on and comic wise in the mini comics, I was already there. Splinter Skull, you know, I was there. Yeah. So, and I didn't realize until I read it, threw me for a loop for a moment, you know. So, but I guess you guys weren't concerned at all regarding release dates and how, you know, the comics and mini comics lined up.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, release dates, we have basically no. What's that?
We have no control. We have no control.
Yeah, no control over that stuff. So
the way we approached it was that, well, again, I don't want to ruin anything, but the way we approached it was that all of those stories could happen because of the way the cycle works, right? Like so, and we're not done. Obviously, we get through issue 4. That is knowing we had no control over the release dates, and knowing we had no control over, you know, what further figures came down the line and the later waves and all that sort of stuff. You know, instead of trying to bug the toy designers and trying to bug the marketing people at Mattel, and we just took what we thought was the heart and the soul of the story and made it, you know, push that to the forefront. And I think the way we set it up, it's so flexible that at the time we get to issue 4, we're like, okay, throw this toy in there, perfect. And all right, you know, this is the perfect time for this. And I think, you know, that allowed us a lot more leeway, because we weren't rigidly trying to go along with, you know, who knows when toys will ship, and the boxes and the plastic and the Target and who knows, right? So we just didn't do it. We didn't worry about it, you know.
Do you think the mini comics are required reading?
No, I think that they complement. I mean, if once all the mini comics are out, or somebody had them in their possession and had the mini series that Tim and I are working on, I think you could read them back to back or just solo, and they would still work, because the genius way that Tim constructed our story can incorporate the stuff of the mini comics, but it's not entirely necessary to read those.
Yeah, that's the hope. Just with comics in general, like I always feel like you have to make sure you aren't requiring anybody to read anything else. You want them to be engaged and go seek it out, but you know, hopefully our book tells you everything you need to know, but it entices you to want to check other stuff, and that's pretty much the job. And you know, anything other than that, if we're making you go buy, you know, a bunch of figures and get the mini comics and put them together and do this, like, we're not doing it right. Like, our job is to make something that it's contained. And you know, if we had a sort of edict for ourselves, which was no one told us to do this, we said, let's make it all work. Like, let's do that. You know, I think, and that's just because we like it, right? It's not because anybody said, you know, you must contain this figure every issue. I've talked to Larry Hama before. He worked on G.I. Joe for years. Obviously, back in the early days of G.I. Joe comics, you know, they would just send him, here, you got to put in this issue, you got to feature the USS Flag and Sky Striker and all that sort of stuff. And then Larry would write it sort of based on who would have to show up, also maintaining his own story and character stuff. And we didn't have that edict either. There was nothing. I mean, there was nobody said you have to use these designs. We were just like, they're awesome. So let's.
I should probably mention, and Mattel seems to be okay with this. They used to do this over at heman.org before it closed down, and we have it in our community forums. This great guy named Smitty81. If you go to foreternia.com/community, and you'll see a thread in the action figure forums. The entire thread is dedicated to scans of the Origins accessory mini comics, not real comics. You get banned from the forum if you do something like that. But the accessory mini comics, because there's some people who don't collect figures, some people can't find the figures, some people can't afford the figures, especially later on at resale prices. So Smitty81, he went ahead and like catalogs all of them, and so many people are so appreciative. So and he does an amazing job. So and then hopefully Mattel will one day publish them, through Dark Horse. But until then, we have Smitty. And so I guess if anyone that is checking this out and loves it and wants to see it complimented and doesn't collect or can't get the figures, it's really hard to find these figures, by the way. I mean, if you go to stores, they're like gone, the day they arrive. So it's really tough. So there is that option for people. But, it'd be nice if you guys could throw it in with the trade.
I don't know if
I'd love that, but I'm not sure how realistic that is, but I'd love to, because it would be I'm a completionist myself. The stuff I collect, I like to have every little scrap that they can fit in there, and it would feel better to me if we could put it out there, because it's actually hard. I don't even have the mini comics yet. I don't have the published mini comics. I have to get them probably off of eBay if I later on when I look for them.
They're sometimes pricey too, Freddie.
Yeah, but I'd love to see them all in one chunk. Yes. And that way you could also read them back to back, or however you might want to read them. Just in other words, for availability, and if you wanted just to have all the story together, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Actually, I agree that it probably legally can't be done. And to be honest with you, I'm trying to remember. It was light. I think the trade paperback was under 100 pages. I think they announced that. We reported something like 95 pages. So I guess there wouldn't be enough room. Yeah, darn it. So the artwork. Let me do an analogy here, Freddie. Back in 2008, I believe, writer Jeff Loeb and artist Ed McGuinness created a new Marvel character called the Red Hulk, and launched a new Hulk ongoing comic series. And when that launched, Jeff would repeatedly say in multiple interviews that Ed McGuinness was born to draw the Hulk. And he was right. I mean, his sensibility, his style, everything, it was just perfect for it. So, and Freddie, I mean, after looking at your terrific artwork through this book and others, it seems like the same statement applies to you, where you were like born to draw Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks. And I can't be the only one who thinks that. So what do you think that is?
I was very, very into the Turtles when I was younger. I have an older cousin who showed me there was a role-playing game book of the Ninja Turtles by a company called Palladium Books. Yeah. And that was that was back in the old, long ago. But when I was very young, that was my first exposure to the Turtles. And that got me then to go and get to Walden Books, and I picked up a couple of the like the color reprints of the early Turtle books, and so those early that early Eastman Laird sensibility of the Mirage books, not issue 1. I didn't see issue 1 for a while, because when I went to Walden's, they only had like collection part 3 or 4 or something like that. So it was like the later evolution of what the characters look like. But the point is that I'm constantly thinking of that version of those characters. So the sort of muscle mass and the grittiness and the expressions, because those Eastman Laird books are just legendary. I love them. What Goes Around Comes Around, which was the Leonardo one shot. that's like probably the best Ninja Turtle story I've ever seen. And so if I ever have questions on what a Ninja Turtle looks like, I reference those books. So I guess there might be, I'm heavily inspired by, but if people feel that I'm successfully sort of invoking that or evoking that, then I'm doing my job. That's what I want to do, is I want it to feel like those Mirage books, but without it being a straight up copy, just the same feeling though. So
it works, man.
Thank you.
What your technique in the modern age? What are you doing now? Is it all digital or?
Let's see, I do digital layouts so that I can move around elements. So it's especially useful when you're doing like a big crowd shot, so that
your double page spread in this is great.
Like fitting all those characters together is like a little puzzle piece. So like rotating and shrinking them down and stuff like that is useful. But then I print out those layouts in light gray onto my artboard, and then I ink traditionally from there using diluted India ink, which is called ink wash, and a little bit of watercolor on their masks and stuff like that. And then Andrew Dalhouse, who's an amazing colorist, he colored my work. We worked together on Godzilla versus Power Rangers for IDW a couple years ago, and he's doing a fantastic job on this as well. We just got the colors in for issue 2. They look really great. Tim and I were just emailing about that before we got on here. So
they're awesome. So
yeah, he's great. So the work that I do is an ink wash, it's tonal values, but then he takes it and really brings it to life from there.
This new age is really killing collectors, with the elimination of slowly but surely original comic art, So it's sad to see that go. But
yeah, I mean, I've still got plenty of original art, but there are a lot of artists that are 100% digital. For me, it's just the digital layouts, and then
that's what I mean. Just generally speaking, the way the market seems to be moving. So
yeah.
And Tim, again, without spoilers, perhaps my favorite moment in issue 1 is right in the beginning of that issue, between Donatella and Splinter, in relation to the workings of Eternia, that soft. It was a touching moment. It was brilliant. I loved it. I don't want to ruin it for people. They'll know it when they read it. But
Tim really embodied the characters. Honestly, he really got This is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time Tim was writing the Turtles for a published book or whatever, and he got what made them click and what makes them feel like the Turtles.
Right, but in relation to Adam and Man at Arms and the guilt.
Yeah,
really good.
I grew up on Turtles like Freddie. I got it was one of the first 4 series I ever collected, which was the Archie one. I couldn't find the much of the Mirage one. It would come out and I would buy them. Like I have Mirage issues hanging up. Like I have.
You do?
Yeah,
those are worth a lot.
There's Reddit for us to play.
There you go.
Yeah, I always loved those stuff. But I grew up, 1987 or so is when I started getting stuff monthly because we got a bookstore in my town, which we didn't have accessible before that. So, when I could, I would buy the Mirage issues, but they were sporadic. So I had like issue 4 and like, just weird ones. But then the Archie series came out, the Ninja Turtles Adventures, which I think was like 1987, 1988. And that was, one of the first series I collected. So, I'm like Freddie. I grew up on Turtles for sure. I actually surprised myself when I was working on this that I was like, wait, have I never written Turtles before? Like that happened to me when I was like, no, I have to.
I had to have written the Turtles because you know them so well.
Yeah. I mean, because I in every way they were sort of formative for myself as well. Any kid our age, who grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, like Turtles was like the first thing you ever heard of, like a sort of indie hit. It was like this big deal. I remember buying Comic Scene magazine that have, like black and white Ninja Turtles images, and you'd be like, what the hell is this? But it was, until those later ones, it was harder to find, at least in a small town like where I came from. But yeah, I mean, and I think the thing about Turtles that I liked is the same thing I like about Master Universe, is that it's super flexible as long as you maintain the core of the characters. So I think, the idea of Prince Adam being this sort of reckless prince who gets this massive responsibility that only he can take on, and he has to still maintain being a jerkbag, so that no one knows that he's got this power. That stuff. I love that stuff. And then the Turtles is, they're outcasts, they're freaks, they're weirdos in their world, but they still fight for the people who don't care about them. They're and they're teenagers while they do it. They just want teenagers just want to rebel and want to be, against the world, but they don't want to because the world already outcast them out. So they want to be part of the world. So, that's, you keep the core, and then you can do weird stuff like cybernetic triceratons and whatever else we did.
All right, well, gentlemen, before we wrap this up, I got 2 questions about the future, and I promise you your answers will be brief.
Okay.
So first, Reptile Wars. For anyone who doesn't know, Reptile Wars was announced by Mattel at this year's San Diego Comic-Con, and it was billed as the next stage of the Turtles of Grayskull storyline, with figures already announced. So, I guess it's a multiple-part question here. Freddie, you doing the mini comics for those? Or you can't say? Or no comments? No comment?
I can't say.
Okay.
I can't say.
Understood. And will you? You guys won't be able to answer this. I hope to see you do the sequel series if there is one. If this one is successful enough that you guys will be back for another 4-issue series.
I'd love that, except for I'd want it to be 40 issues instead of 4.
Yeah, man.
It was actually Rob that was explaining to me, Rob David, a few podcasts ago, that Dark Horse just likes it at 4. It's that perfect number, for that trade paperback. I miss those long 10, 12,
Yeah.
4 is harder to write than 6. It's so much harder. Oh my God. So much harder.
Yeah, I believe it. So, but I guess unfortunately that's the model. It works for them. So I'm just glad they're putting out the product. And all right, the second one that you won't be able to answer is Mattel announced a new crossover soon. That's Masters of the Universe and Thundercats, which I assume will get the same mini comic and comic treatment. And Freddie, you already have history in this, if I'm not mistaken, in a Thundercats He-Man crossover. So same question that you can't answer.
Yeah.
All right. Let's phrase it this way. Would you guys like to be involved if you could?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I heard that exists, but nothing has become official on my end or anything like that. So, I mean, if they want to, I'd love to draw that, but yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know much about it, to be honest. But so anybody who's interested, I did a Rob David and Lloyd Goldfine wrote a 6-issue miniseries that I drew that was published through DC Comics back in 2016 and 17. And I don't know if the toy line, I haven't seen any of the toys or anything. So I heard it as rumors, but I just haven't seen much more than that. I don't know if it has anything to do with that crossover, if it's going to be totally, different designs or something. Not sure.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if it'll be connected to this universe, canon wise.
I don't know. I'd love that. I love the idea that everything's connected and that it has been all along, but they just couldn't say so,
Well, like we referenced in Injustice Masters of the Universe, we referenced the Turtles crossover. So, I mean, not Turtles, the Thundercats crossover.
The Thundercats.
Oh, yeah.
You said, it's like you wrote it where somebody said, like, ever since we since we teamed up with those cat people, I think is how you wrote it. Yeah.
And I would do it again. I would reference it all here too. I don't want to spoil anything. There was a bit that I could have referenced in Justice Mass Universe in Turtles, and I was like, and I almost did, and I cut the line.
Okay.
But there's a place that it could totally fit.
Okay. We'll keep it in mind. I mean, I love that kind of stuff.
So I believe we've run the gamut, gentlemen. Is there anything you guys else want to mention, tease, or promote, before we sign off? Other than this comic, which I'm going to mention.
Yeah, this comic is the main project that I've been working on. I'm doing some covers for Naruto Ninja Turtles. I recently did a cover for Witchblade issue 3. Let's see what else. I did like a bunch of covers in a row that I'm drawing a blank on right now. Drawing Blood, which just came out. That's Kevin Eastman's, one of his creator-owned books. I did a collaboration cover with Kevin for the new Ninja Turtle issue 2, and a bunch of stuff like that. I'm not sure. Convention-wise, I'm going to be at a signing at Elite Comics, technically today, if that makes sense. And then I'm there right now, actually. You don't know. And then in October,
you're showing us the wizard behind the curtain.
Yes,
there.
Yeah. I'll be at a New York Comic-Con and Memphis Expo, Fan Expo, and that's in October. Then November, I'll be in Hawaii and San Francisco Fan Expo. Those are the shows that I have coming up.
Wow,
a lot of travel.
Yeah,
busy. You, Tim?
Yes, I've got New York Comic-Con, and then I've got Motor City Comic-Con and Chattanooga. And then I think I'm done for the year because I've had enough of this shit.
Wow. No wonder Freddie didn't marry you, Tim. You're really crappy.
He likes to go. I'm done. Well, you know, let's do Hawaii. If Hawaii, Freddie, while you're there, they're like, hey, we'll bring Tim out. I'll go to Hawaii. I'll fall on that sword for you, brother.
Well, I guess that's a wrap all. We would like to thank the awesome Tim Seeley and Freddie Williams so much for joining us today. You both were just a pleasure and a joy to have on.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, always happy to chat stuff. Nerd stuff.
Yep. And we would like to thank our wonderful community out there for listening to this podcast as well. Now, if you haven't already, be sure to pick up your copy of the exciting first issue of Turtles of Grayskull from Dark Horse Comics, out today in your local comic book shop, digitally, or both. You know, don't wait for the trade paperback. Support the individual issue. It's a lot of fun. I read it. Now, if you enjoyed this show, please show us your support by liking and subscribing to our streams. You can always drop us a line, too, by sending us an email to foreternia@gmail.com. We do love the feedback. As always, please visit us at foreternia.com for all the latest updates and news and links to our social media pages that can help you stay up to date with all of the Masters of the Universe and Turtles of Grayskull content. So that's it. I would like to thank you all again for listening, and let the power return. We'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having us on.